Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know some of you have already chatted with us in the chat option, but if you haven't already done so, just go ahead and type in the chat option where you are from, letting us know. I know we see some people from Tucson, a couple other people from Arizona. We had some great people on last week from the Netherlands, so we'd love to hear where you are logging in from. This webinar is being recorded, so if you do miss any part of it, it will be available and posted online within 1 to 2 business days on events.bbcommunity.org. You can also view past webinars on that page as well and sign up for additional webinars. We're holding webinars daily, so every day there's a different theme, so we hope you can tune in with us sometime this week or maybe tomorrow. My name is Faustine Chan. I am the Business Innovation Manager for BB, so I've been helping coordinate these webinars just to give businesses useful tools right now. I know it's been hard just working from home from some of us, but we just want to keep you informed and updated, just featuring business experts in the community just to keep you updated and get your business still going as we start to lift up that work at home order. So today we have a great speaker. We have Mike Jones from Resound. He is the CEO of the brand agency, and he's also an Arizona native that has been named one of the top states entrepreneurs under the age of 35. He also volunteers his time as co-director of Phoenix Startup Week and is also on the board of Conscious Capitalism Arizona. He currently lives in the sunny city of Mesa, Arizona with his wife and 3 kids. So please welcome our speaker today, Mike Jones.
Hi, everybody. I hope you all can hear me okay. Let me know in the chat if there's some issue there. Cool. I'm going to share my screen and we are going to get started. As we go, if you have questions, feel free to put those up in the chat. There'll be some dedicated time at the end of today for some Q&A. But if there's something in particular as I'm going that you want to get clarity on, if we've got time, I'll go ahead and address that. If not, we can save it for the end, and we're going to jump right in. Can everybody see my screen okay? Hope you can. It should say every word counts. And the title, the topic we're going to be working on today is brand story. So crafting your compelling brand story to gain clarity, consistency, and customers in your business. Or in your nonprofit, if you happen to be a nonprofit. We'll use those interchangeably today. A little bit real quick about me. I'm Mike Jones, as Faustine already introduced, CEO of Resound. My main role within our agency is developing strategy for our clients, helping them understand their identity in their marketplace and how they can position themselves well to gain customers and build long-lasting relationships with them. And then we've got a full team. I'll talk about them in just a minute here about what the rest of our team does after I do the strategy. So we actually have our own brand story. So we'll set up today with kind of showcasing a little bit of our story and then hopefully help you guys understand how to build your own brand stories around your particular unique brand. So at Resound, we believe that because people are intrinsically remarkable and organizations are created by human beings, that every organization is remarkable too. But we think that there's a challenge. We see that unfortunately, most organizations don't actually act like they are remarkable. And that's where we come into play. We help B2B companies in particular find their authentic identities in order to resonate with their audiences and build lasting customer relationships through content, design, and video. So that's our story. When we talk to other people in the industry, kind of like, what exactly do you do? These are some of our service offerings. I'm not going to go into all those right now. You'll get the gist. And these are some of the organizations that we've helped over the years. Most of these are actually in Arizona. We do a lot of work here in Arizona, but we do work with companies all over the country. This is what we're going to cover today, and we're going to be moving fast because we have a lot of content to cover. I've got a lot to unpack around what is brand, what is a brand story, how do you build one, and then once you have one, what do you do with it, right? How do you build it so that it's effective, that it's actually remarkable, it's really interesting and compelling for your customers, and then how do you incorporate that into all your communications and really make the most use of it? So that's what we're going to be covering today. So I want to start with a little exercise. And you can either do this on paper or you can just do it in your head, whatever is easiest for you. And we're going to be really quick. So what I want you to do is quickly draw or think of a funky picture. All right, you got 15 seconds, so go quickly, all right? I'll give you about 15 seconds, so start now. All right, you should be about halfway. We're doing this fast. You got that funky picture? Maybe wrapping up right now? You can keep working on it while we're going here. That's fine. Okay, so you should have some kind of funky picture. Maybe it's still in your head a little bit. You're working it out. Maybe you're drawing it, or maybe you're kind of thinking about it. Maybe you're researching. Maybe you're going to go find an image or something. That's fine. All right, so the real question is, who defined funky in this exercise? Most people, when I talk to them, say, oh, well, I did. As the person drawing it, or the person thinking of what's funky, I got to define what funky was, right? Some people draw a picture of some stick character. Maybe they draw a picture of somebody playing some funk music, playing, slapping the bass, playing some funk. Some people just draw some random lines, a little abstract art. They say, oh, this is funky, right? But then the question is, okay, you got to define, or you defined funky in this exercise. The next question that this leads us to is, does your customer agree? And in this exercise, who's your customer? Well, you might argue that I am, because I asked you to do it. So do I agree that your funky picture, maybe your random scribbles on a piece of Post-it note, do I agree that that was funky? And if I don't, did you fail, right? Was there something about this exercise that you failed at if you and I disagree about your picture being funky, right? So then we ask, how does this relate to brand, right? So what we're trying to understand is who gets to define your own brand, right? You're about to go on this journey to build your own brand story. So who gets to define that story? Do you define it? Or does someone else define it? Maybe your customers define your brand. Who defines your brand, right? So think about that for a minute. Maybe think out loud, to yourself. Who gets to define your particular brand? Your organization or your own personal brand, if that's what you're working on today. Who gets to define that? Is that the customer's job? Is that your job? Whose responsibility is that? And I actually argue that it's your brand, and therefore you define your own brand. And we're going to get into why that is and why that's really important, and why you shouldn't just let your customers define your brand for you. All right, so again, if you define your own brand, your customers are going to agree with you or disagree with you at some point, right? And they're going to tell you in one particular way, and that is they're going to buy from you, right? If they agree with your brand, they're going to say, yes, that resonates. That makes sense to me. Get me on board. I'm interested. Show me more. But if they don't agree, what do? Well, they're not going to purchase. But I think even more than that, there's other things that they're not going to do. Right? So they're not going to probably stick around, right? They might actually leave. They might not actually have loyalty. They might not come back and purchase something else. So that's how you can start telling if your brand is working for you or against you. And I think there's actually two common issues that a lot of brands face that are going to tell them that there's work to be done on their brand. So the first is, you're not communicating and behaving according to your brand definition. You've done the work, you've defined it, but you're not actually communicating and behaving according to that definition that you put down about who your brand is, right? That's the first issue, or at least maybe you're not doing it well enough, right? Customers just aren't getting it. You've done the work internally, but externally with customers, they're not understanding. The second is, your customers are actually the wrong fit, right? And this happens a lot with legacy brands, ones that have been around a while. Sometimes the first customers that you have change, right? Or the services and products that you offer change. And so that changes over time. All right. I want to tell a little story as we talk about this next part. And I apologize for a little extra noise. I got stuck here in the lobby. So here's a little story about probably the most famous brand, maybe one of the most famous brands this world has ever known. We all recognize this logo, all right? Yep, it's Nike, yeah. All right, so there's a little story about Nike, about their brand and their brand story and how they defined their own brand and their customers resonated with that. So if you go back to the 1970s, right? So we're talking very early in the Nike story. Nike is just getting going. They're building a brand, but they're really building it for one particular audience. And if you think back, if you have experience with Nike going that far back, you can remember stories of what they were known for, right? And when we think of Nike, we still think of their primary product as this, and that is shoes. But they designed their original shoes for a very particular audience, and they built their brand around that audience. And that audience was professional runners, track athletes, people who ran professionally. They made money running. And their shoes, those Nike shoes, were the epitome of professional running shoes. And everyone they hired in their organization was all bought into this vision. Every single product designer and engineer who was working on these shoes all agreed their primary and sole focus for customers were these professional runners. But Phil Knight had a vision for Nike that was a lot larger than that. And so when we get to the 1980s, we see a shift in his perspective and his shift in pushing their company forward in a different way. And he said, you know what? I think we can be more than just a shoe company for professional runners. I really believe that we intrinsically have an identity that is something more than that. We can be a company that produces shoes still, but shoes for a wider range of people who want to live athletically, who want to achieve more. And so they embarked on the process of expanding their brand, saying our brand is more than just professional athletes. It is for anyone who wants to compete or exercise or get fit athletically. And so they produced a campaign that became one of the most famous campaigns the world over through the tagline that they produced for that campaign. And you'll recognize it when you see it, yeah? Of course, right? This campaign was not intended to be the end-all be-all Nike slogan for all time. This campaign was actually intended to simply introduce their products to a wider audience and say, look, like you want to achieve more athletically, and we want to help you do that. And so we're going to produce shoes not just for professional athletes, we're going to take that expertise and we're going to apply it to the everyday consumer. People who, you know, the weekend warriors who just want to like get fit and do some exercise and really like compete maybe, you know, not professionally, but just amateur level on the weekends, or maybe even just somebody who just wants to be at the gym a little bit more, or run around the track field or the high school track field in their neighborhood and really just get more fit, right? And find ways to achieve more physically in their life. And so Nike embarked on this process of launching a campaign with this particular headline. And what's really interesting is that this headline, typical campaign headline, lasts maybe 18 months, maybe 3 years if you're really lucky. The Just Do It tagline actually lasted as their official advertising campaign headline for over 10 years. And that's just unheard of. And I really believe that there's a really fundamental reason for this with Nike. And that is because that this particular advertising campaign didn't tap into just a new demographic for their products, but it tapped into the core of their brand. The core of their brand is to achieve victory, right? It's what the Nike swoosh means. It's what the Nike name means, and now the tagline. And so we see that this is working out in their actual campaign. So here's the challenge to you. I want to challenge you as to what your brand story is and is not today. And I want to help you define your authentic brand story as we go through this process. And then we're going to start building on what makes your brand story remarkable. So before we do all that, I got to do a little setup as to what brand is and is not, so we're all on the exact same page, because otherwise we're going to get into some confusion later on when we start working on brand story and we start disagreeing about what that brand means. So I want you to take you through a couple exercises. Think about what you think of when you hear the word brand, right? So maybe you think of a name, right? I mean, these are really compelling names. Think about Kleenex, right? How many times do we use the word Kleenex and we don't even mean the exact brand? We actually just mean tissues, right? But we use that name as if it's its own category of product. Same thing with jacuzzi, frisbee, popsicle. Every single one of those is actually trademarked, registered trademark names. Those are actual brands. They become so synonymous with their category. And yet when I say, oh, well, the brand is the name, right? You would look at me and go, no, Mike, it's definitely more than that, right? I can't just have a good name. I got to have something more. Okay, all right, so maybe it's the logo. You got the name, you got the logo, right? And these are really compelling logos, perhaps some of the best ever made, all right? We certainly recognize them. We don't even have to see the name and we know exactly who these brands are. And yet if I say, oh, okay, so all I need is a name and a logo and I got a brand, you're going to go, well, kind of, but not really. Like that seems pretty simplistic. There's got to be more to it. Like there's more to it. That just doesn't feel like enough, right? That the brand means something more. Okay, so let's add a little messaging. Maybe it's adding a tagline. These are really compelling taglines. I mean, we talked about Nike already. I mean, you could just put their tagline on, just do it. And you know exactly who you're talking about without even seeing a logo or a name. And yeah, okay, so logo, name, tagline, that's it. We're done. We've got a brand. Not really. If you go around your neighborhood and ask people and say, here's my name, logo, and tagline, what do you think of my brand? They might say some comments about the design of the logo or the clarity of the name, but they wouldn't really think that you're a brand. Not yet, at least. So there's got to be something more. Okay, so well, what if we add some advertising in, all right? If you guys remember this amazing, advertisement from the commercial from the Super Bowl a few years ago, all right? This is the Tide ad, right? It won a bunch of awards, got a lot of PR credit. Man, it was a really compelling, it was funny. They said the word Tide like 18 million times. That's a great ad, right? And if I said, all right, well, the Tide brand, that's all summed up. It's right there. It's the ad, right? And you look at me and go, no, Mike, like that's not the entire brand. There's something more to it, right? That's not the definition of brand. Okay, so you got to have a product, right, or a service, right? You can't have a brand without stuff to sell, right? Okay, let's think about this. All right, so Apple, you know, they got the iWatch, right? Or Facebook, you got the interface, you got this experience that you have online, or oh man, Starbucks. Like you could walk in any Starbucks, take the name off, and you probably still know it's Starbucks, right? It's branded, it's a branded experience, but it still feels like when I say the Starbucks brand, is it defined by just their store? No, like there's more to it. It's deeper than that. It's almost philosophical, right? So is it all that stuff? Well, I think it's all that stuff, and yet it's a little bit more, because I think it is something deeper and more intrinsic to the organization than just a logo, tagline, colors, fonts, store experience, right? It's kind of all those things, but with a foundational undergirding of it, right? And I would argue it's actually the identity of the organization. Brand is the identity of the organization, and how that brand, how that identity gets fleshed out in all of its experiences and communication, and how they design and build their products and services and how they deliver them, right? All the behaviors that come out of that identity. If we want to think about this, let's think about just the word brand, right? Where does that come from? The word brand actually comes from the Old Norse word brander, which literally meant to burn, right? Rub two sticks together and make a fire. Pretty quickly, it became something more than that, right? You think about medieval or even ancient times and livestock and herding cattle and sheep all over the mountainsides, right? And you run into this very simple problem very quickly, which is that all of your sheep look like just like your neighbor's sheep. So pretty quickly, you're getting into arguments about, well, when I round up my sheep and you round up your sheep, it feels like you got some of mine and I got some of yours, and we're going to have a little fight over this. And so pretty quickly, people started to mark their livestock with what we think of as the original brand, right? Hot piece of metal to imprint a sense of ownership, right? This is mine and not yours, and that's yours and not mine. And we don't have to fight about it anymore because it's clear, right? It provides clarity. And so that's the original kind of meaning of the word brand and the usage of it in an everyday type of sense. And from there, we move into another period in our history as human beings where people are shipping things all over the world, right? Think 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. People are interconnecting all over the world. India is producing tea that's getting shipped all the way to the United States and back to Europe and all over the place, right? And if you take that example of shipping tea from one side of the world to the other, what typically happened was, you know, you load the tea into a crate or a barrel and you put it on a ship and it ends up somewhere else on the other side of the world and it gets unloaded, but no one knows what is what, right? What's in this barrel versus that crate, and where is this supposed to go and who's supposed to get this, And so pretty quickly, these companies, right, these organizations of people who are working this trade are actually starting to mark on the barrels themselves, usually with a hot iron, right? So it's starting to sound familiar, starting to mark on it what it is, right? This is tea, this is coffee, this is some other kind of product. And then those barrels and crates end up in the shopkeeper's shop. And as he dishes out the tea from the barrel and serves it to his customers to take home and use, they start associating the kinds of markings that are on the barrels and crates with that kind of product. And some even come back and say, you know what? I saw on that one barrel, it had the name of the producers of that product, that tea, and I really like it. And you know what? I really want more from that particular producer. And so they start asking for tea from a particular brand. Oh, that's interesting. And that's really the birth of like the modern concept of brand, in the sense of marking ownership of a product or claiming that this is a certain level of quality, a certain level, a certain promise of what we're going to deliver on the inside of this package, right? And now actually I think we've moved into a new realm of brand where things that we produce as companies, these services and products and experiences that we create, are even more meaningful for our customers, right? You think about Apple producing white AirPods, right? These are not just functional in their sense of design, but they're actually a status symbol. When someone puts in a pair of Bluetooth earbuds, people make assumptions about them, right? They make some kind of judgment a little bit, or I make a projection of myself out into the world when I put them in. And I say, look, this is a product and a company I want to identify with. And it's distinctive, right? This product is very distinct. And so now we actually get into a level of branding that is really about not just quality or fulfilling a promise with your brand, saying something about your products and services, but actually your product is a status symbol, or can become a point of status for your customers, right? That they self-identify with aspects of your brand. And I think brands, just like people, we have identities, they grow and they mature over time. And so do brands, right? We start in one place, but we don't end there over the course of growing and grooming and pruning and really trying to create the most mature, if you want to talk about growth, talk about it in a maturity or health type of way, right? I think that's really what most brands, what we're trying to achieve with our brands is the health of our brand. Is it really producing fruit, right? Both for us and for our customers. And I think it's really important that just like a tree grows up, that we also need to think about our brands from the bottom up. We need to think about the roots as much as we think about the fruit that it's producing. And I'm going to use a different metaphor in just a second here to kind of encapsulate this. If you think about a house, right, we always start with the foundation. We never build the roof first or the kitchen or put in all the appliances. We always start with this really kind of unsexy, uninteresting part of the house building process, but it is so critical, which is the foundation, right? And if you think about it, your foundation is not the final product. The house is the final product, but the foundation is so critical. And I think the brands are the same way. Your brand is not your product. It undergirds your products and services, but it's not your product alone. If you think about a house, right, like the things that are the product of the house are the things that get customers really excited, right? It's all the features and the benefits that come with those features. But here we see a little bit different perspective when it comes to the sense of brand, right? So here we have, it's easy to interpret your product or service, but it's hard. It's not as easy to interpret the foundation of your brand, right? And that's why we have to do the hard work. So let's talk a little bit about why brand matters before we jump into building a brand story. I'm going to give you a couple examples here. So in this first one, I want you to pretend, you have to pretend for a moment, right? Suspend disbelief. You are shopping for a minivan, all right? You are shopping for a minivan. You narrowed it down to these two vans. You're going to pick one or the other. Which one do you pick? On the left is Chrysler, on the right is Volkswagen. Based on the limited knowledge that you have right now about vans, which one are you going to pick? Think about it for a second. Pick one. All right, did you pick one? All right, I'm going to bet that you picked Volkswagen. Why do I say that? Because 98% of the people that I put this exercise in front of pick the Volkswagen. And they usually say something like, oh, German engineering or safety, right? These are things that Volkswagen is known for. And so they assume that the brand is going to carry that through in their minivan. I want you to think for a minute, what is the intrinsic difference? What is the fundamental difference between these two vans? Right? Well, we can look at the outside and say, oh, there's some styling differences. There's a different logo on them. There's probably a little bit different kind of way that they interpret the interior, some of the little accoutrements within the inside. But if we strip all that away and we look at like what really makes this a minivan, right? It's the chassis, it's the frame, it's the drivetrain, it's the engine, right? These are really fundamental pieces, and that's really what we're buying when we buy a car, right? We buy something that gets us from point A to point B, does it reliably. And when we actually strip these two vans down, what do we find? They are actually literally the exact same chassis and frame and drivetrain and engine. Yeah, in fact, they're both Chryslers. Chrysler invented the minivan, and when Volkswagen wanted to bring a minivan to market, they went to Chrysler and said, hey, can we license that from you? We'll stick our logo on it, but it'll be your van. Here's what's really interesting. When you put these out into the market, which one sells for more? The Volkswagen does, right? And that's our first lesson in why brand matters, is that perceived value is intrinsic to brand. You can create more value for the same kind of product than your competitors because you have done the hard work of building a great brand from the foundation up. All right, I'm gonna skip a couple slides here, just to keep us going. Here's another example for you. We've got two brands featured on the front window of this car. What are they? Uber and Lyft, right? How did you know? How did you know that they were different? Well, they had different logos, right, Mike? They have different colors, yeah. Are they intrinsically that much different in the product that they offer? I bet if you open up the app, you're gonna find almost the same pricing. You're gonna find the same app features. You're gonna find almost the same exact UI design, the design of the actual app. And you actually are probably going to find the exact same driver. You know, here we go. Here's an example right here with this car. This is the same person is driving for both Lyft and Uber. And yet they're different, right? And we make a decision based on that. And that's actually one of the other fundamental values of brand, right? Is that it creates differentiation. We are us and not them, and they are them and not us. And you get to pick, right? And we've made it easy for you to pick. Doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to pick you, but it does mean that you're different, right? So if you're layering these, right, perceived value and differentiation, you have more value and you are different, you make it that much easier for people to choose you. Here's one last example for you, another brand we've already covered today, right? What is this brand? It's Nike. How do we know? Well, the swoosh, right? And yet here are all these different products. They're known for making shoes, and yet they offer so many more products than just shoes. Why is that? Well, it's because people are bought into the brand, right? There's loyalty to brands. If you build a strong brand, people want to stick around with you, not least because you've made it easier for them to make a decision about a related product or service, right? We are human beings. Our brains are actually wired to conserve energy, to use as few calories as possible in our decision-making processes. And so when you create a new customer for your brand, you're creating the potential for them to be loyal to you because you make it easier for them to trust that other things that you do will also help them. And that's one of the values of brand. In a crowded marketplace, and I would argue every single marketplace is crowded, even brand new ones, because let's be honest, everyone has a million messages flying at them every day. Every customer has a crowded mind space. They have a crowded attention span, right? And that's what your brand is up against. Everything else that person is worried about, right? And in the end, in a crowded marketplace, brand always wins. All right, so what gives you the best chance at building a strong brand foundation? How do we work on that foundation in particular? And I think you have to start with the truth because the alternative is fake, false, or forced, right? If you don't start with the truth, then you have to fake it, right? And we live in a world where faking something with brands will not last. There's way too much information at our customers' fingertips. There are way too many customer reviews and testimonials. There are way too many other places of information that they can gather in order to understand your brand and what's true and what's not. So how do we find the truth of your brand? I want you to think about this for a couple minutes. So here's where we start, right? I think there's 4 fundamental questions that we have to start with for our brands. The first is, where do you want to go? What do you really value? How does it all feel? And then finally, what story do you tell with your brand? And that's the one that we're going to hone in on today. So we're going to talk about these, and there's 4 basic deliverables for your brand foundation: your vision, your core values, your personality, and your brand story. We're going to focus on that last one today. All right. So brand story. What is it? It's 2 to 3 sentences. It's going to be short, right? It can maybe be a few more, but generally it's pretty short. And we want it to be impactful. That's why it needs to be short. It needs to convey as much information about your brand in as few amount of words and sentences as possible. It has to have characters. Every great story has characters, and so should your brand story. It's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like any other story that you create. And those beginning, middle, and end pieces have really important parts to them that make them impactful. And it's going to answer the why, the how, and the what of your brand. And it's going to inform all of your content. So here are the basic elements of your brand story. You're going to have a hero with a problem, and you're having a guide with a solution. And we're going to be using the example of Star Wars today. In particular, the hero of Luke Skywalker and the guide who is Yoda, right? So as we go, we're going to be thinking about these characters. So who is it? Luke is our hero, and we need to be answering the question for our own brands. Who is our hero in our brand story? I want you to think about that for a minute. Who is the hero in your brand story? Think for just a minute about that. Who did you pick? Did you pick your brand? That might be the temptation, but it's not actually true. In a great story, the hero is not the brand. In a great brand story, the hero is your customer, right? Because your customer is the one who has a problem that needs to be solved, right? If the brand is the hero, then the brand has a problem, and the problem needs to be solved. But if you enter into a conversation with your customer and you introduce your brand as the hero of the story, you're intrinsically creating confusion for your customer, because you're creating a story that's not about them. You're creating a story that's about somebody else who has a problem that's getting solved. And that's not the experience that they're having. The experience they're having is that they have a problem and they're coming to you to help solve that problem. And so you have to be really clear about the hero being your customer and that they have a problem for you to help them solve, okay? So I want you to think about that. So now, in light of your customer, who is your customer? Think about that for a minute. How much detail can you think of for your customer, your ideal customer? And what is the core problem that they're encountering? Those are the really 2 most fundamental, basic, foundational elements of your brand story that you have to get really good at understanding. Okay, so now we're going to move on. The next piece of our brand story is the guide, right? And if you think about the Luke Skywalker story, right? Luke Skywalker is our hero. He's like our customer. He has a problem. What is his problem? Well, he has a lot of different problems. One of them is he wants to get off the planet Tatooine and move away from his aunt and uncle because he's tired of being stuck living with them, right? It's the classic teenager story. But he has another problem in his life that he needs help with. And that is that he has discovered that he has this power called the Force, but he doesn't know how to utilize it, right? And in his process of uncovering that problem and trying to find a solution, he comes to meet a guide whose name is Yoda. He comes to Yoda to train him, right? And in your story, when you think about your brand story, if the customer is the hero, then your brand has to be the guide. And maybe you're not as old as Yoda. Maybe you don't have the Force like Yoda, but you bring a specific and special experience or product or service or history or other context to the story that you're telling to your customer, right? You have a specific way in which you're going to help them solve the intrinsic problem that they have. that your product or service is specially designed to help them with. Okay, so that's why you've got to know yourself. You have to understand, what are our core values? What's the personality that we bring to the table? What makes us a uniquely suited brand to help solve this problem for our customer, right? Yoda is uniquely suited to help solve this problem for Luke, right? He has the Force. He is a master of the Force. He's been alive for over 800 years using the Force. He is wise. He's seen a ton of things in his lifetime. He knows how to solve everything for Luke, right? All he needs is Luke to trust him. So how does this guide help the hero solve their problem, right? That's the next question. How do you, as the brand, the guide in your customer's story, how do you solve this problem for your customer? And that's something you got to spend some time working on. Just like you need to understand your customer and their problem, you need to understand your brand and how you solve that problem, how you do it in a unique or different or compelling way for your customer, and hopefully an effective way, right? If it's not effective, why the heck are they buying from you? All right, so let's piece these things together. Now that we know the characters, we can put together a beginning, a middle, and an end to our story. I'm going to walk you through a process that we've already outlined in a worksheet, and that's down at the bottom of the screen. If you want to download that worksheet, it's totally free. You can do it on your own. There's no, you can do whatever you want with it, all right? But it's going to walk you through this process again, but I'm going to walk you through it as well. And you can do this later. You can work on that worksheet. In fact, that's going to be the homework out of this presentation. So I've created a fictitious company. We're going to call them Smile Co. And we're going to walk through the process of building probably a very basic, a very simplistic kind of cookie cutter or Mad Libs style brand story for them that you can use that same process to do for your brand, okay? So we're going to use Smile Co. as our example. So we're going to start with the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story starts with the customer's experience before you as the brand enter in, right? They're a person or they're a company that you sell to, but before you show up to help save the day, right, for them, what is their life like? What is this problem they're encountering? What is the context around that problem? So you need to start with this phrase, before we were here, and then fill in the blank of before we were here. So in our example of Smile Co., before we were here, preschoolers were sad, all right? So we've just introduced our customer, the preschooler, and we've introduced the problem in our beginning of our story here, which is that they were sad, okay? So think about that for your brand as we're going, right? What is the beginning of your story before you were here, our customer, and fill in the blank about that customer. Give it some detail, give it some interest. And then what was their problem, right? What is the problem that they have before you come into the picture to help them solve it? All right, so fill it in for you. Before we were here, who is our customer and what problem do they have? Okay. Moving on to the next part is the middle of our story. The middle is the realization that they need help and they look for you, right? So you are being introduced into the story at this point. Your brand is entering into the scene. This is like when Luke lands on the planet where Yoda lives and he first meets Yoda, right? This is the middle of the story. How does that interaction happen? How does that go, right? So I want you to think about that. You can introduce this part of your story with this very basic phrase, then we showed up and what happened, right? Who are you? What do you bring to the table to help them solve that problem? So if we use our example of Smile Co., right, then we showed up with our Smile Co. Smile Paint vending machines, and preschoolers realized they didn't have to be sad anymore. All right, so here we go. Here is us, our brand, showing up on the scene, right? And we introduce our product, right? And if you have a whole suite of products and services, you're going to want to tie that together in here. But for this particular example, we're going to stick with just the one product, Smile Co. Smile Paint vending machines. So right off the bat, we understand how the problem is solved for these preschoolers, the customer, right? And the realization that those preschoolers had when the brand shows up. All right, there's a lot more detail you could add to this. You can add some validation that you really know what you're doing, that SmileCo Smile Paint vending machines are 100% guaranteed to work, to solve your smile problems, right? To solve your sadness. We could add all that in, but for the simplicity of our example, we're just going to keep it this basic. Okay. So for yours, you want to think about, then we showed up, our brand showed up, and what happened, right? What product or service or suite of products and services do you bring to bear on your customer's problem to help them solve it? And what's the realization that they have in that process? And then we get to the end, right? The end of our story is, how does this change our customer's life? Now, we might not be solving cancer, right? We might not be solving the world's most intrinsic problems with our brand or with our products and services, but we are certainly creating some kind of difference in our customers' lives, right? If not, what are we doing, right? Why do they keep coming? All right, so that's the question you need to answer. How does what you do, how does it not just solve their problem, but how does it actually change their life in some fundamental way, right? How does it help them overcome and become a better person, perhaps, right? So in our example, the difference we made, we could say that for SmileCo, the difference we made is that preschoolers painted smiles on their faces and made each day of school a little happier, right? They got a little bit more happiness into their life because of our product. It doesn't solve all of their sadness issues, right? If there's problems at home or problems on the schoolyard with bullies, we don't solve all that for them, but we certainly make it a little bit easier, right? And that's okay. That's a great way to introduce how you and your brand make a difference, right? What is the end outcome that happens for that hero, for that customer? How does it change their life in some fundamental way? All right, so then you would fill it in for you, the difference we made. What was that difference that you made in your customer's life because of the products and services that you provide for them? All right, now we can stop there, or we could add one more piece to our brand story. And I like to call this the alternative ending, right? And this might not be a part of your brand story you're gonna show the entire world in everything that you do and all the different ways you communicate. But I think it's a really important reinforcement of the difference you make, right? So it's a different way, it's the opposite way of thinking about that last part of your story, the difference that you make in your customer's life. So what happens if your customer, the hero, doesn't use you? They don't go with your brand, right? It's probably not just status quo. It's not just, well, preschoolers remain sad, although that's true, right? And maybe there's more to it. Maybe they become sad and their school experience as a whole was less joyful, right? And maybe less rewarding, maybe less effective, right? Because we know that happy people tend to do better, right? In whatever they're achieving. In this case, our preschoolers at school. They don't learn as well, maybe. So those are aspects that we can add into our what if statement. I think this is a great piece of work to write down and think about, work with your team on, and then stick in your back pocket. Don't maybe put that out into the world with all of your communication, but have it kind of in the back of your head of like, what's the sad ending? What's the alternative ending to our movie, right? This is the ending that not everyone walks out of the movie theater and goes, well, that was such a great movie. That's the one where you walk out and you go, that was kind of a downer there at the end. Yeah. But I think it's really important that you understand that alternative ending, even if it's not one that you put out into the world. Because as you are creating content, as you're communicating your brand to people, if you understand that alternative ending for them, you will be a better marketer. You'll build a better brand, right? Because you understand the dangers and the difference that happens when they don't go with you, okay? All right, so you could write that out. When we weren't there, what happened? What happened to the hero? What happened to your customer if you don't show up? Okay, so now we're gonna put it all together and get a little creative. And I'll give you an example for SmileCo of how you can do that. So let me just hide a window here so I can read it all. The world felt like a sad place because preschoolers didn't have an alternative to sadness and frowns. SmileCo, like a ray of light bursting through burdensome clouds, brought a new and refreshing alternative to sadness with our face paint vending machines. Preschoolers everywhere took notice, choosing to abandon continued sadness and painting their faces with Smileco's brand. It's hidden behind my Zoom call here. Oh no! There we go. Painting their faces with Smileco's amazing brand of smiles, right? All right, so now we've kind of put it all together, right? You saw how we took the three parts, the beginning, the middle, end, and our different characters, the hero who has a problem, the guide who has a solution, and we've put it all together in 3 sentences, right? We kept that to 3 sentences. We just unpacked the entire Smileco brand in 3 sentences. And this is what you should be shooting for, aiming for on your maybe second round. Do the first round, fill in the blanks, right? Then second round, kind of stitch it together, have a little fun with it, be creative with it. And then I'm gonna give you some more ideas of how you can even take it further, right? That's like kind of your baseline brand story. If we wanna take this further, let's actually make it resounding, right? So how do we do that? Well, resounding brand stories have a few attributes to them, or some of these, right? So one is they might weave the pieces together covertly. If we think back on that example, right, that we wrote for Smileco, this one here, the world felt like a sad place, blah, blah, blah. Smileco arrives, right? And then preschoolers use our product and they have a better life, right? That's a pretty formulaic beginning, middle, and end. So what you can do is actually weave those different elements together a little bit more covertly. Here we have an example from Virgin America. And they actually start with the beginning as the problem. Okay, well now they're kind of following the process, right? Virgin America is a California-based airline. This is on a mission to make flying good again, right? They're stating this in the beginning, and the problem is that flying isn't good. Although there's a little bit of an assumption there. They don't actually say that there's a problem. They just say they're on a mission to make flying good again. So that's the first part of kind of making this a little more covert. The second part is they end with the happy ending, right? So what do we all want out of our flying experience? We want brand new planes and attractive fares. We want top-notch service and a host of fun, innovative amenities, right? We want our flying to be good again. And here are the things that we expect out of a great flying experience. And then instead, so they've already gone to the ending of the story, right? The happy ending, and they've put it in the middle. And now they're going to end with the middle of the story, which is when you arrive, right? And what do you bring to your customer? What are the features that you bring? And here they list all of their features that help create that great flying experience, right? So they've actually worked this backwards almost, right? They start with their mission to make flying good again, which inherently infers the problem, right? And then they state what's the outcome? What is this great flying experience that you want to have? And then how are we going to get there? What are the features that are going to help us get to that experience that they promise they will have, okay? The second one that you can do, this is the second way to make Resounding a brand story, is you can infer the hero's problem from the solution, right? So instead of stating the problem directly, you can infer it from the solution that you provide. So here's an example from Beats, right? Beats by Dre is a leading blah, 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 blah. And then in the middle, they say, helps bring the energy, emotion, and excitement of playback in the recording studio back to the listening experience for music lovers worldwide. They never actually state what the problem is, but they infer it by saying they help bring the energy, emotion, and excitement of playback in the recording studio back to the listening experience. That infers that it doesn't actually exist right now, and that they're going to help you have that experience again, right? You've been missing that, and we're going to help you bring that back. Here's another way that you can resound your brand story, make it more creative and compelling. You can imply, not explicitly, but you can imply the audience. You don't have to state the audience explicitly. Remember our Smileco example? We just said preschoolers, right? We said exactly who our customer audience is, but we could, like GoPro, infer it. They say, like how a day on the mountain with friends is more meaningful than one spent alone. That's in the middle of the statement, and they use it to infer who their audience is. They never actually say like people who are athletic outside, right? Or who ride mountain bikes. They just say a day on the mountain. They kind of paint this picture of people having a great time on a mountain with their friends and wanting to share that with their product. That's how they infer their audience. All right, and the last one I'm going to give you today of a way in which you can resound your brand story is to leverage your founder's story. If your ownership or your founder or someone in leadership has a great story that resonates to the brand story, that's a great thing you can leverage. So here we have an example from Warby Parker. They start with, "We were students when one of us lost his glasses on a backpacking trip." That actually is their story. They're encapsulating in their brand story the story of their founders themselves, right? They're saying, look, we had this problem, so you might have this problem too, and you can trust us because we've already had it and we've solved it for ourselves, and we want to offer it to you. That's a really great way to create a more resounding brand story. Here's some examples I'm gonna let you have here. There's actually gonna be a link to the deck if you wanna go back and kind of unpack these. These are examples of actual brand stories that my agency has created for some of our clients. This one was for a startup that produced technology to help job seekers get matched with job recruiters in a more human level kind of way. And they actually end their brand story with this fantastic statement: "We make the job search suck less." Right? And they followed this process. We helped guide them through the brand story process and come to this brand story that they ended up with. And what's really cool is that final statement almost summarizes everything, right? We make the job search suck less. So the problem is inferred there. Either in terms of, looking for a job sucks, and that search process sucks, especially because there's all these algorithms and technology out there that's kind of working against you when you're looking for a job. They're going to make that happen differently, right? Their brand arrives on the scene, and they've summarized that actually in one sentence, and that's now actually their tagline. Here's another example from another company, and same thing, right? We worked through their brand story process and we're able to summarize it in one sentence, covered with verified integrity, right? This really brings to bear what this company does for their customers in a very specialized and niche industry. You can come back and read these at some other point if you want to, because we're running out of time here. You've already read ours. I won't cover that again. I want to cover, before we wrap up here, just some ways in which you can use your brand story, right? Because once you have it, I think a lot of people kind of go, okay, well, what do I do with this, right? I've got this really compelling 3 to 5 sentence story, but I don't know what I'm supposed to actually do with it from here. How do I make the most of it? So I want to give you some ideas. I think there's some really great ways that you can incorporate it into all of your marketing communications, really make it effective. So first is, like, it literally can become your elevator pitch. Just like I used the Resound brand story at the beginning of my presentation today, you could use yours, right? Whether you're presenting or you're networking or you're pitching your company, you can provide an opportunity to summarize your entire brand in one slide. How amazing is that? Right? That's part of what makes your brand story so effective, is that it's so concise, right? You can use it anywhere. Anytime you present, anytime you pitch, anytime you're meeting someone, instead of answering the question like, who are you and what do you do? And you answer with your job title, now you can answer with your brand story. And I can tell you from personal experience, both for myself and for a lot of our clients, that when they do that, they get a lot more interest from the person they're talking to, because they have introduced a story rather than just some basic bullet point facts about what they do, right? And it's a story that's positioned not as them as the hero, but as the person they're talking to, potentially. You can create different versions. So this is another way that you can use your brand story. Create different versions depending on who you're talking to, right? If you have a multifaceted audience that you typically talk to, maybe you have different industries or different types of customers, you can tweak your brand story a little bit for each one of those kinds of audiences. And that provides you more opportunity for people to experience a brand story that's really unique to them. Here's another great way. Take it. It's your headline and intro on your website, right? So we've just solved the basic homepage for your website with your brand story. You can just use it, plop it in there, and now you have a way to introduce yourself right on your website, and it's going to be really effective and compelling and interesting for your potential customers, right? Another way, it's the About Us boilerplate. So every time you produce a brochure or a sales sheet or a press release, your brand story, your About Us section of that is your brand story, and it's already written. It's already done. You don't have to think about it. You just drop it in there and you know it's going to be effective. In fact, you could even use your brand story as kind of a template for each of your brochures, sales sheets, and press releases, right? Every time you write something, you can actually use your brand story to help inform the process. Am I telling a story about my customer as the hero who has a problem, and we arrive on the scene as the brand who is a guide with a solution for that problem, and we're going to create a great happy ending for our customer at the end, right? That is the story that you should be telling in every single piece of content you create, which is my last point here, right? That you can create, this becomes inspiration for blog posts or newsletters or ebooks or articles for publications. Everything you create from a marketing content perspective, even your advertisements, should be telling this brand story in a unique and fun and interesting way, right? Take a spin on it. Every single time you retell that brand story, try to spin it a little bit different and see how it comes across. Tailor it to the type of audience that you know that that content's going to show up in front of. Tailor it to the kind of product or service that you're introducing through that brand story, okay? And actually, there's one more. You could even use it to write a book. In fact, we're actually in the process of doing that right now. I'm writing a book with my business partners all about how we believe that organizations are intrinsically remarkable and yet struggle to act like it. And we're writing a whole book about how every single organization is remarkable and how they can rethink about their brand in a way that allows them to become remarkable, allows them to showcase that remarkability to the world. All right, so I'm gonna give you some homework before we're done here. All right, so I want you to think about your mom, right? When's the last time you talked to your mom about what you do, about your business, about your brand? Did she understand anything that you said? Probably not, right? If she's like my mom, maybe, but maybe not, right? I want you to go and do the homework of creating your brand story. And then I want you to get to a point where when you tell your mom your brand story, she goes, yeah, that makes sense. You might not understand every single word in that brand story, but she understands the gist of it and understands what your brand is, who your customer is, what their problem is, and how you solve it for them. Okay, so that's your homework, is to get to a point where you can tell your mom. And I have some steps for you to get there. So the first is you're going to have to review what you already have, what you've already put together through at least some thinking, right? As we've been working through this process, have you thought about your brand in this brand story process? Think about what you have, write it down, right? And you're going to have to write it and rewrite it and probably rewrite it and rewrite it a few more times until you really feel like you've got something decent, right? Utilize those things that we talked about, inferring your problem, implying the audience, using your founder's story. You can do all those things. Think about weaving the pieces together covertly. Infer the hero's problem from the solution, imply the audience, leverage your founder's stories, and then try it out. Create as many different versions. Ask your team, ask family, ask friends, even customers, their feedback. Does this brand story seem right? Does it match what we know about us, right? Ask the people you already know. And then I want you to do one more thing before you talk to your mom. Over the course of 5 days, I want you to share your brand story with 5 random strangers. Find 5 people who don't know you and your brand and say, this is my brand story. What do you think about this? And get their feedback, right? So those are some really simple ways that you can take this brand story and really make it a lot more interesting, okay? And then go talk to your mom, right? Go tell her. And ultimately, do or do not, there is no try, right? This truly is a great mantra when it comes to your brand. There's no trying, there's just doing. So you got to go do it. And lastly, I want to leave you with one last thing. Will you resound your story, right? That's my last question for you today. All right, I see a few questions. I'll get to those in just a second because I think actually I've already, we've got a few tools for you guys, including this deck. So if you want to go download the worksheet, it looks like Kimberly, you asked about that. There is the worksheet URL, rsnd.co/brand-story. You can go grab that worksheet right there. If you want to download the deck, I actually have the wrong URL in here. I'll give it to you in a minute, the right one. And this is not the first thing, this is not the only thing you can do to work on your brands. There are other things that we touched on. If you want to work on those but not sure where to start, I would highly recommend taking our own brand audit. It's a free tool. You can use it and do it in your own time. It's a quick self-assessment of your own brand and maybe give you some ideas of where to start. You can find that at rsnd.co/brand-tool. And then here's the deck URL, rsnd.co/bbb there at the very end. And I can put these up in the chat if that's helpful. If you want the brand story worksheet. I'm putting that up right now. Luke, you asked about some of my favorite books. I assume you mean favorite books about branding and marketing, because I have lots of other favorite books that are more science fiction-y. But that's probably not what we're talking about today. There's a great one, A New Brand World by Scott Bedbury, tells the story of Nike that I touched on very early on in this deck, and I highly recommend it. He was the VP of advertising for Nike when they created the campaign, the Just Do It campaign, and then from there he went on to Starbucks, and he tells that story of becoming their first VP of advertising that Starbucks ever hired. It's a fascinating story. I highly recommend that book. Another great one is the 22 Immutable Laws of Branding. That's like a foundational book about branding, how to think about your brand, how to position yourself in the market. I highly recommend those two books. So yeah, Luke says he still wants to talk sci-fi. We'll have to take that offline, Luke. I think we might lose people if we start going down that road, but if that's something you're interested in, shoot me an email. Any other questions? Okay, so is now a good time to rebrand during this crisis, or is it bad because you lose customers? Well, I think that's a layered question with a lot of different ways to answer it. I actually think, depending on where you're at with your brand, this could be a fantastic time to rebrand. There's a couple reasons for that. One is people are expecting change right now, right? And brand is intrinsically, if you're going to rebrand, that's a big change. And so doing it during a crisis may actually be really helpful for your customers as they're engaging with your brand in a very different way than they have been before. This might be a great time to pivot. And we see a lot of brands that are doing that right now. At the same time, yeah, there's a cost to rebrand, not least like the work, but also there could be a cost of lost customers. Although I find that typically when you rebrand, you're doing it because you need to refocus, right? Or you need to change the focus of your brand because something's been lost over time, right? Something has drastically changed on the back end of your brand. And so now you need to showcase that to the world in a different way. And when you do that, typically what you find is that you become a more focused brand and you get more customers because of that, right? We talked about some of the advantages or the value of branding, one of which was, producing perceived value, right? So you're actually going to make more money with your customers that you have, or at least they're going to find you more valuable than your competitors. You're going to differentiate better, which means that you're going to cut through all the noise in your industry. And you're probably also going to see that people more easily resonate with your brand because you've done the hard work of really refocusing it for them and really making it very clear what it is you do and how you solve their problem when you use that brand story. So that's a great question. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that. I think you kind of have to take it kind of one piece at a time. You need to assess your brand and where it is you need to rebrand. Is it a complete rebrand? That can be a big challenge. Or is it, we just need to dial in our messaging. We need to dial in our look. We need to be more focused with the brand that we already have. Those are questions I'd be asking at any time, but especially right now during this crisis where communication is limited. You have limited opportunity to communicate and get in front of clients and customers. And so I think, the more focused your brand is, the more specific you can be, the more powerful your brand is going to be at this point, especially, but on into the future, no matter what happens. So what territories does Resound help clients in? I'm not quite sure what you mean by territories. Do you mean like physical regions or areas? We work with clients all over the United States. I don't think we have any clients outside the United States, but primarily, West Coast. We do a lot of work here in Arizona, as well as California, a little bit in Colorado. We've got some clients in Chicago and Florida, if that kind of helps right now. It depends a little bit too. What kind of stage they're in. So I hope that answered the question a little bit. We're not typically very regionally bound. There's nothing about the work we do that requires us to have to be like really close proximity, although visits to clients and getting the experience of their business is helpful. It's usually part of our process, but that doesn't have to be something where we're there like every day or anything like that. So what other questions do you guys have? Oh, I missed one. Sorry, Luke. Where do I think branding is going in the future? Is there anything people should be aware of? Any weird trends? Oh, that's a great question. Well, here's one. It's been trending for a while, but brands are becoming more and more personal, right? As we interact in more digital communications, we have a more opportunity for brands to communicate one-to-one, right? Whether that's through social media or email or advertising on digital platforms, or even on our phones through text messaging, SMS, or through apps, right? There's never been more opportunity for brands to create a one-to-one relationship with customers. What's interesting about that from a branding perspective is that means that you have one of the best opportunities to create personality through your brand and win customers over through personality. We see this a lot with brands on social media. Some of the most beloved brands on social media have done a lot of really hard work to uncover the personality of their brand and create interest around that. It doesn't always have to be funny, although that's typically, I think, what gets highlighted from kind of a media standpoint. But when you have a perspective on the world that's interesting and unique because of your brand experience, and you bring that to bear through a unique personality in your communication, especially on social media, you have a really great opportunity to create a really awesome experience. And as you think into the future, right, you think about virtual reality, you think about augmented reality, you think about more and more of these digital experiences, just like the one we're having right now. That is the future of communication, right? Customers are more and more going to be interacting with your brand digitally. And now is the opportunity to create a really compelling and interesting experience for them through the personality of your brand. All right, Luke's got one more question. Some companies determine enemies. I know T-Mobile did that with AT&T. A lot of political companies target movements. What is your opinion of companies defined by what they are against, or if they even use that tactic or that tool? I think that actually is it's a great tool. I think you need to be careful with it, right? If you don't do the hard work of understanding your identity first before you identify your enemy, you will find yourself just doing the opposite of what your enemy does, which can often paint you into a picture, paint you into a corner, right? If you think about, and maybe this is not the most accessible analogy, right? But if you think about the analogy of a battle in a war, right? One of the strategies that you can take is actually to get your enemy to do what you want them to do through the inverse of what you do. And you can actually utilize that. So if you think about that in your own industry, right, there's some competitiveness with your competitors, and you can actually get painted into a corner because you have taken the approach of just doing the opposite of whatever your competitor is doing. And that can actually backfire on you. So I think it's a really helpful tool to understand, like, what are they doing? In fact, one of the tools on our website is a competitor analysis tool. And I use it with all of my clients, of understanding kind of who their competitors are and where they line up or don't line up with the brand that we're representing and helping. So I think it's a really, really good exercise to go through. Patrick's got another question. I have used companies like Boom by Cindy Joseph to learn about successful branding. Do you use certain companies for research on branding or ideas, such as browsing their websites and such? Yeah, we actually do that research for a lot of our clients. So we actually collect data on their competitors as well as their own websites, understanding them and what they're doing. So, all right, I think that's all we've got time for. Luke's given me the hook, right? I got to get off the stage. So thank you all so much. Feel free to reach out. If you've got more questions, I'd love to answer them. And thank you all for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, Mike, for taking time out of your busy day to educate us on branding and awareness. Once again, this webinar was recorded, so it will be posted on events.bbcommunity.org. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We will go ahead and send this URL link to the deck if you do need it again, if you missed it from the screen here. But thank you, everyone, for attending. Please stay safe out there and be healthy.